In 101 AD, the Roman Empire stood at the absolute peak of its power. Under the command of Trajan, its legions had already defeated the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. Carthage was erased, Greece was absorbed, and Egypt was brought under Roman control. Every enemy that stood before Rome eventually became part of it. The Roman army was not just powerful, it was precise. Every soldier was trained the same way, equipped the same way, and fought as part of a perfectly coordinated system. Their shield, the scutum, was considered nearly impenetrable. Their formations were disciplined, calculated, and proven over centuries of warfare. Nothing about Rome's military success was accidental. It was built on structure, repetition, and control. For generations, this system had delivered victory after victory, creating the belief that Rome could not be surprised and could not be broken. But in 101 AD, Rome marched north. Beyond the Danube River lay Dacia, a land rich in resources, fiercely independent, and ruled by a king Rome underestimated, Decebalus. At first, the campaign felt familiar. The Romans expected another swift conquest, another enemy that would fall into line under imperial rule. They had faced tribal warriors before, and none had ever forced Rome to rethink its strategy. But this time was different, because on the other side of that river, something was waiting for them. Not just an army, but a weapon. One that didn't follow the rules Rome had mastered. One that didn't respect their shields, their formations, or their experience. For the first time in centuries, Rome was about to face something it wasn't prepared for. At first, the battle followed a familiar pattern. Roman legions advanced in tight formation, shields locked, moving as a single unit. Commands echoed down the line, and every soldier knew his place. It was the same system that had defeated empires. Then the Dacians attacked. They carried the falx, a long, curved blade, unlike the straight swords Rome was used to. It wasn't designed to clash against shields. It was designed to go around them. Instead of striking forward, the falx came down from above. It hooked over the top of the Roman scutum, reaching into the space the shield was supposed to protect. The blows landed on arms and shoulders. Hands were broken. Shields were pulled aside. Some strikes were powerful enough to cut through helmets. For the first time, the Roman shield was no longer reliable. And once that realization spread, everything changed. The strength of the Roman army had always been its formation. Discipline, unity, predictability. But now soldiers began to adjust individually, and small breaks in formation started to appear. These were not inexperienced recruits. These were veterans, men who had fought in multiple campaigns and survived. Yet now, they were facing a threat they had never trained for. The falx didn't just injure soldiers. It disrupted the foundation of Roman warfare. Rome had mastered fighting enemies in front of them, but this weapon came from above, from an angle their entire system failed to account for. And in that moment, something almost unthinkable happened. Roman soldiers felt doubt. The reports from the battlefield were impossible to ignore. This was not a minor issue, not a temporary setback. The falx was consistently breaking through Roman defenses, and the longer the war continued, the more dangerous it became. Rome faced a choice it almost never had to make: change, or keep losing men. For centuries, Roman military equipment had remained largely unchanged during active campaigns. Standardization was one of Rome's greatest strengths. Every soldier trained with the same gear, trusted the same protection, relied on the same system. But now, that system had been exposed. So Rome did something extraordinary. They adapted in the middle of the war. Legionaries began receiving a new piece of equipment, the Manica, a segmented iron arm guard worn on the sword arm. It was designed specifically to protect against downward strikes, covering the exact area the falx targeted. This was not a refinement. It was a direct response to a specific threat. The right arm, once exposed during combat, was now reinforced with metal plates. In some cases, additional protection was even added to helmets, strengthening the top where falx strikes landed. This change tells us something critical. The Dacians didn't just challenge Rome militarily. They forced Rome to rethink its own design. For over 500 years, no enemy had pushed Rome to modify its standard equipment during an ongoing war. But under the pressure of Decebalus and his warriors, even Rome, by 102 AD, the First War came to an end. Rome had pushed deep into Dacia, and Decebalus was forced to accept peace terms dictated by Trajan. On the surface, it looked like a complete Roman victory, with Dacia reduced to a client state under imperial control. The terms were harsh. Weapons were surrendered, fortifications were dismantled, and Roman engineers were sent to supervise and enforce compliance. Everything suggested that Dacia had been neutralized as a threat and brought firmly into Rome's sphere of influence. But beneath that appearance, something else was happening. Decebalus understood that he could not defeat Rome in a direct confrontation, not with the balance of power as it was. So instead of continuing resistance, he adapted his strategy. He used the peace itself as a weapon. The Roman engineers, sent to control Dacia, became an unintended source of knowledge. They introduced advanced construction techniques, military architecture, and hydraulic systems. Gradually, the Dacians began to absorb the very methods that made Rome dominant. Instead of weakening, the kingdom was transforming. Its capital, Sarmizegetusa, evolved into a fortified complex built using Roman principles. Defensive structures were strengthened, infrastructure became more efficient, and water systems were designed to withstand prolonged sieges. What had once been a stronghold was now becoming a calculated defensive system. The peace treaty had not ended the war. It had prepared the next one. And when the conflict resumed, Rome would not be facing the same enemy. In 105 AD, the fragile peace collapsed. Decebalus broke the treaty and launched new attacks against Roman positions. This was no longer a defensive struggle. It was a calculated move, built on everything Dacia had learned during the years of peace. This time, Rome understood the stakes. Trajan did not respond with a standard campaign. He prepared something far larger. One of the biggest armies in Roman history was assembled. Over 150,000 soldiers, drawn from multiple legions and supported by auxiliary forces. This was not just about victory. It was about ending the threat completely. The campaign moved with precision. Roads were built. Supply lines were secured. Fortifications were established step by step as the army advanced deeper into Dacia. Every movement was calculated, every decision controlled. Rome was no longer reacting. It was executing a plan. When they reached Sarmizegetusa, the difference was immediately clear. This was not the same city they had faced before. The defenses were stronger, more organized, built with an understanding of Roman tactics. It was a fortress designed to resist Rome using Rome's own logic. But Rome adapted again. Instead of rushing the walls, they targeted the system behind them. The Roman army identified and destroyed the water supply feeding the city. Without water, the defenses meant nothing. Without supply, resistance could not last. The siege became a matter of time, and time was something Rome controlled. With Sarmizegetusa collapsing, the war was effectively over. The defenses had failed, the water supply was gone, and the Roman advance could no longer be stopped. Decebalus understood what this meant. He did not surrender. Instead, he retreated into the mountains with what remained of his forces. The terrain offered temporary protection, but not escape. Roman cavalry units were already in pursuit, moving fast, closing the distance with every passing moment. There was no path left. Eventually, the chase came to an end. Decebalus was surrounded. Capture was seconds away. For a Roman triumph, he would be taken alive, displayed in chains, and paraded through Rome as a symbol of defeat. He refused that ending. In that final moment, he chose control over humiliation. Drawing his blade, he took his own life before the Roman soldiers could reach him. The scene was later recorded on the stele of Tiberius Claudius Maximus, one of the riders who had pursued him. It shows the exact moment, a king, cornered, making his last decision. For the Romans, this was victory, but it was not simple, because even in defeat, Decebalus denied them the one thing they valued most: dominance over a living enemy. And in doing so, he turned his final moment into something else. Not just an end, but a statement. The war was over, and this time, there would be no return. Dacia ceased to exist as an independent kingdom and was fully absorbed into the Roman Empire. Its lands were reorganized into a province, its population brought under Roman control, and its vast gold reserves redirected into the imperial system. For Trajan, this was not just another campaign. It was a defining achievement, one that strengthened Rome economically and politically. The victory was celebrated on a scale few had ever seen. For 123 days, Rome became a stage of triumph. Games, executions, and spectacles filled the city, reinforcing a single message: Rome was unstoppable. This was not just a celebration. It was propaganda, carefully designed to remind every citizen and every enemy what resistance to Rome would ultimately lead to. As part of that display, the head of Decebalus was brought to Rome and placed on the steps of the Capitol. It was meant to symbolize total domination, the complete and final defeat of a king who had dared to challenge the empire. And in practical terms, it was true. Rome had achieved everything it set out to do. The territory was secured, the enemy leadership was eliminated, and the region was brought under control. From a military and political perspective, the campaign was a complete success. But this victory carried something unusual, because this was not a war where Rome simply imposed its system on a weaker opponent. This was a war where Rome had been forced to respond, to adjust, and to rethink its own assumptions. The introduction of new armor, like the Manica, the changes in battlefield awareness, and the scale of the second campaign all point to the same reality. Rome had encountered a problem it could not ignore. The Dacians did not defeat Rome, but they changed it. And that creates a different kind of outcome, one that doesn't fit neatly into the idea of absolute victory. Rome gained the land, the wealth, and the control, but it also revealed a limitation. Its system, for all its strength, was not untouchable. In the end, Rome stood victorious, but the empire that walked away from Dacia was not exactly the same one that had marched in.